Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. Let's talk storytelling. When a customer walks into your store or engages with you online, are you actually telling them a story or hitting them with bullet points that are branded babble because you think you know who they are? Do you, as a brand, write your own copy in your own brand voice? Or is it third partied with an agency who tries but doesn't know any of your actual customers? And who is the hero of your story? The customer, the brand, or Batman for that matter? Ed Shimp is a writer, book author, narrator, adjunct professor, video creator recognized as one of YouTube's 10 EDU Gurus, and he's a subject matter expert at storytelling. And on this episode, we'll take a deep dive into storytelling, how to improve your content marketing, the buyer's journey, Shakespeare's ticket sales, Macbeth and Hamlet, Aristotle, Jaws, Joseph Campbell, and much more. So let's tune in to a theatrical storyteller with a storied shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. All right, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. So, if you would tell us a little bit about your background and your story to date.
I'm one of those sort of jack of all trades kind of guy, been around for some time. I'm a storyteller in principle, and I've been interested in stories really since high school. So I've been at this probably 40 years, doing different things with an undergraduate degree in acting and a graduate degree in directing. In terms of how that interfaces with marketing, I did a lot of commercials and industrial films and so forth, and been on sort of that long end of the marketing thing. So I'm also doing a lot of content marketing and writing, a lot of ghost writing and so forth for executives, writing blogs and writing about marketing as well on some blogs. And then ultimately became a writer of copy and so forth, and produced my own YouTube channel, the Profs Pop channel on YouTube, with my son, which was an educational channel, and we won an award from YouTube. We're called one of their top 10 EDU Gurus on YouTube. So I do a little of this and that. I'm also a big time film fan, and have written a book on film appreciation with my son called the Film Fan Handbook, a four-part thing. So, but storytelling has been my obsession from the get-go, really.
So, you said that Shakespeare invented marketing. Kind of unpack that and explain how and why.
Well, you may know that Shakespeare invented thousands of words. Some people exaggerate, that's say 20,000 words or something like that, but it probably is around 1,100, 1,200 words, at least theoretically. Perhaps there were words that were popular at the time and he was the first one to put them on paper or something like that. So, for example, there's a Scottish word called gloaming, which means twilight. Or heading into the darkness. Shakespeare riffed on that, and he turned the noun gloaming into an adjective gloomy, and that's where we get the word gloomy from.
Hmm.
He also invented the words hurry and road, and this particularly fascinates me because before Shakespeare, you couldn't hurry down the road. You could amble down the avenue or saunter down the street, but you couldn't hurry down the road. Now, there was a verb road to ride, but there was not a noun. So it turns out that he invented the verb market. Again, the noun market existed since whatever it's an ancient Latin word, I think. But in the play, As You Like It, Act 1, Scene 2, there's two characters, two girls, Celia and Rosalind are there, and Celia says, here comes Monsieur Lebeau, and Rosalind says, with his mouth full of news, Celia says, which he will put on us as pigeons feed their young. And Rosalind says, then we shall be news crammed, and Celia replies, all the better, we shall be more marketable.
Hmm.
Which is, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the first time that marketing was used as a verb. Technically, that's a verb used as an adjective, but it's to market. And then he later on does the same thing in The Tempest when they're talking about the sea monster Caliban, and they say, well, question whether they could take him to the market and sell him as a fish, and they say he's a plain fish and no doubt marketable. So now I suppose that's pretty much a technicality on whether he invented marketing or not, but I guess a lot of other people claim it.
Sure.
I just heard the other day Philip Kotler, who is apparently an octogenarian. He's getting up there. He's still around, and he's claimed to have invented marketing. So I guess you
Sure.
take your pick. I think it's sort of interesting that Shakespeare, as a marketer himself, people think, wow, this Shakespeare, it wasn't like he was writing for high school students, that are going to be reading his plays some days. This was a guy who was merely trying to sell theater tickets, and get it done. So he was certainly a marketer himself, trying to get people in the seats. That's for sure. But
Sure.
I'll tell you what, I'd like to go back in time and have a piece of his brand.
No kidding.
If you had a choice of owning Uber or Shakespeare, I think I'd take Shakespeare at this point.
No kidding. Well, all right. So let's dive in then to storytelling. What is it that with storytelling that marketers are doing wrong?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I think that maybe between the two of us, I don't have an MBA, and I'll defer to you as being the master marketer.
I graduated from the 13th grade, so that's as far as I got.
And I'll tell you what. I think that a lot of times it's just simply a case of they're being busy. They've got deadlines and they have things to do, and it's not taking enough time to stop and think through whether what they're saying makes a lot of sense. And I'll give you an example, or I'll ask you a question. What is the marketing funnel? You hear people talk about it all the time, right? But if I take a funnel, say, and I put 27 marbles at the top of the funnel, what comes out of the bottom of the funnel? It's 27 marbles,
Mm-hmm.
But still, it seems to me that when marketers talk about it, they're talking about it more of a filter, that they start out with so many and it shrinks down as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, but I think what happens is we get caught up in metaphors, and people use it, and it sort of gets passed around, and nobody thinks about what it really means or if it actually works. And there's not much use of a metaphor that isn't really evocative of to what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So for me, I think that not all storytellers are marketers. Absolutely. But I think that all marketers have to be storytellers. In a way, we all are storytellers every day. We say, what happened last night, or, you talk to people, and that's how human beings get along. That's what it is to be alive in a way. But I think that to be a good storyteller requires a lot more effort and research. I think you have to read about Joseph Campbell, and you have to really read about Aristotle and Horace and things like that to get it down. And I think that marketers go to these seminars and they hear somebody speak for a half hour, and then they pass it on to the next person and the next person, and then ultimately things get lost, and they never go back to the original source to learn really, really how stories work.
So give us a good tangible example of this.
So to me, the classic example of this is about, and I don't know, seems to be getting old now, the old thing of make the customer the hero of the story. And I say that's getting old because now we're into more purpose-led things, and now I think we're sort of the pendulum is swinging back, and it's about the business being the hero. But when people say make the customer the hero of the story, I get confused because I don't know. First of all, I think if we're saying customer, what do we mean? We probably really mean prospect, right? Because we're not talking about, I think, because that's what I want to know is what story are we talking about? And how do you make someone a hero? It seems to me that, if we're talking about a customer success story, well, then we're talking about something in the past. You can't really, it's already done, right? They're the hero or they're not the hero. And you can have a different a narrative on it of whether you're going to give the credit to the customer or the product as you go. Um,
Well, wouldn't it? Couldn't you still look at it then as, I mean, if you are trying to fix a customer's problems, most brands should be learning to stop with the brand babble about their product or service and features that go along with it, and really focus in on Bob the customer, or Sally the customer, and really how that product or service affects them throughout that journey.
okay, so that's fine. So now we're going to make it um, about them. So which now we got to figure out
Yeah,
how do you
that is
make them
my
the
opinion,
hero?
by the way. That's not necessarily the way most people do it. Most people
Right.
still spew brand babble. You know, it's through a third party that wrote it for them, say a third party agency that they work with, who's not tied closely enough to the customer journey itself. They're not, most of the agencies and third parties in the world are, could name one customer. They don't have access to data. They don't know who they are unless they've seen them respond on social, but they don't know who the customer is with that kind of interaction the way a brand should know them better.
Oh, we're going so many different directions here. I don't know
I
where to
know.
go first. Um, Let me tell you a story about my son. Uh, for reasons that are unimportant, he had to be homeschooled, and he was an only child. Is an only child, and so what we would do is periodically, he was very lonely. Periodically, we would have play dates, right? And we'd bring people over to play. And this is what he would do. We'd say, okay, Jessica, Johnny are coming over on Friday. And he would take his toys and he would line them up in a line. And he would say, he would make up the whole dialogue. He'd write a script. Jessica, Johnny are going to come over and she's going to say this. And then she'll go play with that. And Johnny's going to come and he'll play cards with me. And then Jessica will move over to the Legos. And he had it all worked out. And what would happen is they would show up, and Jessica was in a bad mood. She went over in the corner and colored with crayons, and Johnny came and smashed everything. And he would try desperately to get them back onto the script to get it to go. And I think that this is what marketers try to do, is that they say, okay, I've got this marketing plan, and we're going to have this first touch, and they're going to come in here and do this, and then they might go this way or that way, and they plan it and map the whole thing out, and they sort of get a little bewildered when the customers fall out of the marketing funnel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think that what happens is that the marketers become uh, more like dungeon masters than they are storytellers.
Sure.
And so it's a matter of finding the focus of just what story are we talking about here? Because I don't think that you can control the customer's story. It's their story. It's like my telling the autobiography of Kenneth Kinney. All right, not your biography, your autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, well, I think I'm going to make you the hero of the story, but George Clooney has a better name, so maybe I'll use him. you know, so marketers have stories to tell. I just don't think that they can tell the customer's story.
Then
And
help us unpack what story they do need to tell and how they should frame it.
I will do that. Absolutely. So what happens is customers are on a journey, and you can call it the buyer's journey. I think that's appropriate. Again, I think that you want to be precise about things. They're not buyers until after they buy, right? So they're prospective customers, right? And so what happens is, well, one day, like all stories, what Joseph Campbell called the monomyth, right? They're going along and everything is just fine in their life. And then one day, and we always have that in stories, right? They start out with once upon a time, then it comes to then one day or all of a sudden, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, something's gone wrong and there's a question. How will I fix it, right? And they proceed from there, and ultimately it will end with they purchase something. They get a service, they do whatever it is, they slay the monster, and the story's over, right?
Mm-hmm.
So between when the question is asked, brought up to begin with, and when it's answered, when the monster is killed, they're going through a path, a regular routine path. Well, for the marketer, and this is the story. So the your prospective buyer is going on this journey. They've got this problem, and now they find themselves at the marketer's bar. And you've put a sign out front that says, "Come in here, and you'll get some information." And you do. And so what happens is, and this is where things go wrong a little bit, is that they walk in and they say, "Listen, I've got problems. My wife is leaving me. My car is broken down, and I've got tons of student loan debt." Right? And so, what does the bartender, who's the marketer, what does he say? Well, it seems to me today, most of the time, they say, "Well, we've got 4 beers on tap. You can have, Bud Light, Miller, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what the guy's looking for.
Mm-hmm.
What he wants is some sympathy, you know, some understanding of what he's doing. So the appropriate response is not to say, "This is what I'm selling." The appropriate response is to tell him a story about something, you know, some sympathy, and go, "Yeah, I know what you're going through. There was a guy in here last week who," and then you tell the story. But um, I think that the marketers have so much research and so much data that they're picking up from the Internet of Things and from all the market research, that they presume when the customer walks into their bar, they know exactly what they need, and they hand them bullet points
Mm-hmm.
instead of telling them a story. They'll give them the features and benefits, all the specs on things, that when the customer comes into the marketer's bar, we go, "I don't even care what your story is. I already know it.
Mm-hmm.
I know before you walk in the door that your wife is leaving you and that you've got student loan debt.
Mm-hmm.
And, here's what we have on the menu." And the reason we're saying what's on the menu is because the boss at the end of the day wants to know, not how many people did you talk to or associate with or become friends with. They want to know how much beer you sold.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, in my opinion, that the marketers creep over into the sales guy's territory. This is another point that comes in the story of the customer journey, buyer journey. Um, there's a point Aristotle called anagnorisis. And the point of anagnorisis, we'll find out, is the point where things shift from marketing to sales. I know you're a fan of Jaws, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the point where
Absolutely.
Quint is eaten, and it's Brody against the shark, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all you've got left, and he doesn't have any choice. It's going to see it through to the end. So there is a point. I think that marketers have to, or have the opportunity to, be with the potential customer from that initial question that's raised. How will I solve this problem? Right up to the point of, use the force. This point of anagnorisis.
You also had written on a post that I read about specificity being critical to creating a well developed story. Ironically, stories with great specificity have a greater universal appeal. Kind of unpack that and elaborate on what you meant by all of that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'll give you a really great example I was just thinking about this morning. Let's say that you're going to tell a love story,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's about a boy and a girl, and they have trouble, and they work it out, and they live happily ever after.
Oh,
All
okay.
right.
Okay.
So you've got that's your basic love story. There's nothing to it. But does that mean anything to you? Does that impact you? Now, let me give you another example. Have you heard of O. Henry's Gift of the Magi? That story.
Yes.
So this is a story where it takes place in turn of the century New York. It's a couple. They have no money. But fortunately, Jim has got this watch that was given to him from his parents, and it's Christmas time, so he's going to sell the watch so that he can buy these hair combs for his wife, who has this gorgeous hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she goes out and she says she has no money and she's going to get something for her husband, so she sells her hair to the wig maker and buys a watch fob. And so Christmas comes along and they give each other the gifts, which are now perfectly useful to each other, but they're still in love. Okay. So this is the difference between just saying, I'm going to tell you a love story about people and they have
Sure.
a hard time and they succeed, as opposed to telling you a very specific story. And really, you have to read O. Henry, with all of the detail in it
Right.
and the dramatic buildup of it. And that becomes more impactful to you. So again, I think that marketers a lot of time, because of if I go back to the story of the steel mill and the paper mill, right? Well, we don't want to offend the paper mill people because by talking about a steel mill or vice versa. So we're just going to talk about the mill industry in general and make it very broad.
Mm-hmm.
And you think that, okay, that's going to solve your problem and make a more impactful story. Well, it's not.
Sure.
It's actually more impactful if you speak specifically about a specific story in a specific place and specifically what happened, and then you'll get what I call the head nod.
Mm-hmm.
Then people are going, oh yeah, yeah, I get it, because they will make the leap themselves. They will see themselves in the story, and that's why some of the people that I read about online or whatever believe that making the customer the hero of the story is literally about
Right.
I don't know, sort of like a Mad Libs thing or something where you insert the customer's name in there, and then they'll get it. Or you have to have something that's specifically attuned to that given customer. That's the only way they're going to understand the story. When I was in school, I guess probably junior high school or whatever, story of Anne Frank, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not a teenage girl. I didn't live during World War II. I'm not Jewish. I'm not any of that stuff. But it's not like I read that story and suddenly was stupid and didn't get it.
Right.
You
Right.
know, there's a much deeper human theme involved in all that. So I think we have to give the customer, the potential customer, the prospect, some credit that they'll find how that story applies to them. They'll always be looking through it through their lens,
Mm-hmm.
and it's exciting for them to discover it, just the way it's better for us to experience the story of Oedipus through Oedipus, do it vicariously, and then we arrive at it.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, then, how can a marketer today get better at storytelling? What's your advice to those that want to improve their storytelling capabilities?
I think there's a number of things. Obviously, one of the best things you can do is to go and read, particularly Aristotle, Shakespeare, of course, but Joseph Campbell, uh, things like that, to really, become an expert at it.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think that anybody would regret that, because to me, and this is blasphemous, but to me, storytelling is pretty much a religion.
Sure.
And when you think of any other religion or paradigm out there, similar paradigm, it's almost always based on stories. It's always parables about how you get along in life. So I think
Mm-hmm.
no one would regret learning about how stories work and story structures. And there's like a whole subculture of people out there. There's a website called TV Tropes. If you go to TV Tropes, believe me, you'll find all sorts of really compelling things. I think watching movies and reading books are critical to doing that, but you can't do it passively.
Sure.
You have to ask yourself, how is this working? How do I make that work? But in terms of marketers in particular, I think one of the biggest traps is that we hear these things, these quick ideas. Like I said, you go to a conference and somebody talks for a few minutes about how stories work, and you walk away thinking, okay, I've got it all. But you need to question what you hear. That's why I brought up the thing about the marketer's funnel to begin with, because it just sort of occurred to me the other day and going, how is this a funnel?
Exactly.
And so if you don't begin to question all of the stuff around you, you're not going to get there. And then it's a matter of practice, because those people who are in the creative fields, it becomes a habit for them to always be trying to say, you got this thing and you got that thing, and you're going to try to find some way to connect them or something in the middle. So it's about being thoughtful and so forth. So, it's all of that stuff to literally learn about how stories work, to just expose yourself and take in as much as possible, and really question everything.
So, Ed, there were no sharks that I remember in Shakespeare in any of his writings. But alas, poor Ed Shimp, I must ask you, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
My favorite kind of shark? Wow. That's an interesting question. I'll tell you what, I guess I remember when when I was a kid, and I'll tell you what, my dad is a terrific guy. He worked so hard all week long, and every weekend he would take us out on field trips and take us places. And I did the same thing for my son, and that was wonderful. We could bond that way. But he would take us to the aquarium in Pittsburgh, and I remember there being hammerhead sharks there.
Yeah.
And I just thought they were the creepiest things ever, which in a good way and a bad way, as they were swimming by. But I have to say my experience with sharks is fairly limited otherwise.
Well, Ed, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I will see if I am. I'm going to try.
Here we go. Based on your background, number 1, Penn State or DePaul?
Wow. Oh, man. You're making me throw somebody under the bus.
Yep.
I'll tell you what. I'm still living in State College. My heart is with Penn State, but in terms of training, DePaul is just one of the greatest theater schools in the country. So yeah, I'll go with DePaul there for that.
All right. Number 2, content marketing or storytelling?
I'm a storyteller. Like I said, that's my religion. It's my life, and I never stop talking about it.
Number 3, Edgar Bergen or Charlie McCarthy?
You know what? Edgar Bergen was really awful. It's a good thing he was on the radio, because he wasn't good, and he wasn't really all that funny.
No kidding.
It's got to be Charlie McCarthy. I had a little Charlie McCarthy doll when I was a kid, and I practiced, So,
that's funny. Number 4, Hamlet or Macbeth?
Oh, Macbeth. That's a no-brainer. You know what? Hamlet is one of the finest plays ever written, without question. But Macbeth has got ghosts and witches and the whole Scottish thing, broadswords. I'm a Macbeth guy. But, so I'll go with that.
Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, biscuits or cornbread? Well, I'm a Yankee, but I remember my grandmother making cornbread when I was a kid, and that was awesome. So I got to go with that.
Well, Ed, where can people find out more about you, keep up with what you're doing, and more?
Well, it's Ed Shimp at LinkedIn, EDSHIMP. I think the best place is probably the Prop channel on YouTube, and that's PROFSPOP. And to learn more about my thoughts on storytelling, and I wrote with my son the book, the Film Fan Handbook, Volume 1 in particular is about story structure, which is at Amazon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ed, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective. So there was my conversation with Ed Shimp, a writer, book author, narrator, adjunct professor, video creator recognized as one of YouTube's 10 EDU Gurus, and he's a subject matter expert at storytelling. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, as he reminded us, even Shakespeare was just a guy merely trying to sell tickets with some pretty amazing content. Ed said, and I quote, "I think that not all storytellers are marketers, but I think that all marketers have to be storytellers. For all marketers, especially content creators, brand or agency, make sure that what you're saying actually makes sense and isn't just a piece of content stuffed with keywords for rankings or metaphors that don't mean what was actually intended, and then the story gets lost. You have to do more research when really telling a story. Second, sow a debate is to determine who is the hero of the story. Is it a customer success story, which would be after, or is it the brand's product or service? There are different points of view from leading experts on this, but customers are on a journey, as Ed reminds us. They're on a buyer's journey. What we should be doing is helping our prospects and customers fix their problems. So depending upon your point of view, whatever it is, you should really take a look at this part of your content and storytelling efforts, because it will and should affect how you position who is the hero in the story. Peel apart how your brand looks at this and let it guide your efforts in order to engage consumers better. Third, so how do you improve your storytelling efforts? Such a great and simple reminder, you must question what you hear. Ed brings up a great point, even on how marketers often go to conferences and come back with a short story, if you will, a quick synopsis on a trendy topic, and then they recite that over and over again. But to his point, it's not that simple and it's not enough. You cannot take this effort passively. You've got to practice better storytelling and make it a daily habit in your role. As he said, just expose yourself, take in as much as possible, and really question everything. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It has indeed been my honor, and just remember, in the immortal words of Shakespeare, what's in a podcast? That which we listen to Mr. Shark talk marketing by any other name would sound as sweet. At least I think Shakespeare said that. But alas, poor listeners, please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.